Now, these are considered to be very sacred locations, even to the much later Native Americans that settled throughout the region. But the exact age of these Indian mounds aren't necessarily known. Now, we've done radiocarbon dating of things that have come out of these Indian mounds, and the dates will range all the way from 500 years clear up to in excess of 3,000 years. Now, I've talked previously about radiocarbon dating. It's actually based on an assumption that there has been a constant amount of this unstable form of carbon in everything that's alive throughout the past. And yet the worldwide flood would have guaranteed a shift in the total level of carbon for things alive before and for many centuries after this event, the worldwide flood that buried trillions of pounds of carbon. So it's pretty accurate up to 3,000 or so years ago. After that, it becomes increasingly inaccurate, giving erroneously ancient ages. So these Indian mounds probably were in the order of 3,000 or so years old. That's when these people were burying the dead. These Indian mounds are very intricate in shape. Many of them are the size of a football field with coiled tails or geometrical circles or shaped in the shape of pyramids. It's kind of interesting how many of them look like snakes. As a matter of fact, almost all these ancient cultures seem to worship snakes. Why would you worship a snake? Well, Satan came in the form of a snake to supposedly bring knowledge of God, to make us in the image of God. So I think snakes are revered for this reason. The deception he brought as they were deceived into their ancient cultures. But inside of these mounds, they found various artifacts. Now, from the 1850s all the way up to 1910 or so, there were many, in essence, grave robbers that were taking things out of these mounds. There was a book compiled by E.T. Estenhauser in 1910 where he showed photographic plates of 40 different copper engravings or slate engravings or clay tablets that were brought out of these Indian mounds. This is actually published. He described the people that had found them, eyewitness reports of them being pulled out. I want you to look at a picture of one of these engravings. Now, as you look at this, I think you should be stunned by what it obviously reveals. This engraving shows a series of symbols followed by what looks like a flood and people drowning. And the third panel down shows what is obviously a very large vessel. It shows even a bird carrying something in one of these engravings, and animals being led 2 by 2 off of this vessel with 4 people worshiping. Noah and 3 sons would make 4 men. Now, this came out of an Indian mound 3,000 years old, before Moses penned the book of Genesis. How could that be found in an Indian mound in North America? Because these people came through the flood, because they migrated to America, because they had knowledge of biblical events, even though they did not have the written Bible in their hand, and they wanted to record these events for prosperity and put them in a sacred place, one of these Indian mounds. Now, the Indian mounds are considered just a mystery to modern archaeologists. As a matter of fact, you hear so many theories of how they could have been so perfectly constructed. Aliens revealed the knowledge to the people is even often proposed. And those slates that show clear Judeo-biblical events and principles, they're immediately labeled forgeries. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but they fit perfectly into a biblical worldview. But they have to be rejected out of hand by those who can't acknowledge that early humans had this kind of knowledge. Now, the Native Americans weren't the only ones who had this kind of biblical knowledge. In ancient China, one of the oldest cultures that can be traced back to its rapid development, going back in the range of 4,000 years or so, in 1972 they dug up an enormous bronze sculpture. Now, this sculpture is 10 foot tall, and it is the exact replication of a tree. The branches are spreading out. The leaves, however, are shaped like knives. They're sharp and curved and come to a point at one end, and they have a sharpened edge. And nestled in the midst of these leaves on many of the branches is a fruit. Now, you have a fruit protected by knives. It's symbolic, I would think, of a dangerous fruit or a forbidden fruit in the midst of this tree. Now at the base of the tree, there is what is obviously a serpent or a snake. Now this snake is a very vicious looking creature. He's got his teeth bared, like he is a danger to people. But in the midst of this tree, there's a human hand reaching toward the tree or down into the tree. You can see the 5 fingers, the knuckles, the thumb, the fingernails. So we have a human being reaching toward forbidden fruit with a snake guarding the tree. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Here's a sculpture that was made 3,000 to 4,000 years ago describing the most pivotal early event in all of human history, where mankind rebelled against his creator, rejecting what the creator told us and reaching and grabbing a forbidden fruit. The Chinese wanted the future generations to know what brought sin and death and evil into disease into all of creation, in a perfect creation where there was no death and disease. It was the actions of mankind, and they memorialized this in a 3,000 to 4,000 year old bronze sculpture. The Chinese have built an entire museum in one of their provinces around this vine. They don't even necessarily today understand the significance, but it shows the knowledge of biblical events that goes all the way back to the original humanity. Archaeologists divide the slow development from ape-like creatures to humanity into various eras or ages. The Stone Age, where people were just pounding out tools. The Bronze Age, where we finally figured out how to use metal and make implements and tools and more durable things. And then because iron requires much more heat and high temperatures, it came much later in the Iron Age. Now, by the way, the Bible in the 4th generation after Adam says people were working with metals, iron and bronze. So we knew how to do metal work from the very beginning. Complete disconnect between how history is interpreted and what God says is actual history. But what about the Bronze Age? It is estimated, as we look at all of the bronze and brass implements in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in North America, through about a 2,000 year period, and from the 4,000 up into the middle 2,000 years ago, probably conservatively 1 billion pounds of copper would have been required to produce all the stuff that was used over those 2,000 years. Now here's the mystery. We don't know where the copper came from to have produced all of the materials, all the shields, all the pots, all the swords, all the decorations we find all over Europe and Africa and North America and Asia through that time period. 1 billion pounds of metal. Where did it all come from? We haven't found copper mines and copper sources capable of explaining that. A mere 5 to 10% is explainable. So where did it all come from? Well, again, we have to apply our biblical glasses to these things. People were always intelligent. After the flood, they knew about seafaring and building ships and travel. The Phoenicians, the British, the Vikings, all of them were incredibly skilled seafarers. Now, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in the Kinawa Peninsula, there is an enormously rich area of copper veins that have been found. As a matter of fact, from 1820 up until 1890, we pulled more copper out of the Kinawa Peninsula in Michigan than the value of all of the gold in the California and Alaska gold rushes combined. There was more value in the copper alone that came out of this part of Michigan. But in that same area, Island Royale and various areas of Michigan, they have found these enormous pits. They are 25 foot wide, 30 foot deep, and they've found in excess of 5,000 of these very deep pitted compressions in that area. They have no clue where they came from, but they look very much like the mining pits found in England as people were mining for copper and iron in those areas way far back, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Now, if you lined all these pits up end to end to end, it would be a trench 4 miles long. It is estimated that each of these huge pits could have produced as much as 100,000 pounds of pure copper. Now, copper in this area, it's not like an ore that has to be mined. It nearly needs to be heated and melted. This is an actual copper nugget that came out of one of the mines in the Upper Peninsula. It is essentially 100% pure copper with just a little bit of minerals encrusted around it. Copper like this being pulled out could be loaded onto boats and then shipped back to Europe 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. The nation that discovered such a resource would have kept it as a nationally guarded secret, which is why it wouldn't show up widely in documents and literature, and then used it for trade. The Phoenicians and the Brits widely traded in the Mediterranean area with what? I believe this was the source of copper 3,000 or more years ago that led and drove the Bronze Age, and ultimately people, as this petered out, learned to work more with iron and made more and more iron implements. Although iron tools and iron things are found in the pyramids at the very beginning of the development after the flood also. So this whole gradual development of Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age